On the Track is a monthly web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues, and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
Hello everybody, I'm Hennis, and welcome to my show about mystery animals and other things. Mr. John, what have we got in today's show?
Well, Hennis, in this week's episode we return to our conversation with Colin Schneider from Ohio about his work with some of the strangest cases that you're ever going to hear about.
I really like the old credits.
Well, Rossiter, I hear there's a new fitness regime going on down at the old youth outreach centre down in Brixton. Oh, Barry, that's right. We want to get all the kids in tip-top physical shape. Yeah, so you're sending them down to the gym then? Yeah, they're going to go down to the gym and do some weightlifting with Purple Aki.
Well, you can't say that we're not an educational and informative web TV channel. Hi, my name's John Downs. I'm the director of an organisation called the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which is the English-speaking world's largest, and we like to think the best, mystery animal research group. And every Saturday afternoon we bring you this show, and it's called On the Track. By the way, every Wednesday evening we also bring you a show that's about half the length of this, running at about a quarter of an hour, called On the Track Extra. And on the last Wednesday of every month at 8 o'clock, me and the lovely Vivian Powell bring you a show called The Last Wednesday of the Month Show, in which me and Vivian and our regular panel of V. McCrinnan, Dave Scott and Ian Squibbs take a look at the world of Fortean Zoology and the latest news and doings, together with a specially invited guest, and we take a deep dive and often take the piss out of the latest events in Fortean Zoology. But apart from that, do you want to know what it's all about? Well, it's a mixture, it's a melange, it's a muddle, it's a what else begins with M, Lauren? I can't think of anything.
Marmite, of course.
Thanks, honey, I can work with that. Yes, this is, as Lauren points out, a Marmite of a show, because you either love it or you hate it. And the people who hate it are the ones who think that just because it's presented by an anthropomorphic chicken and an old hippie wearing a silly hat, and I think this is a rather fetching hat rather than a silly hat, but they think that because of those two things at least, and the fact that there's all sorts of other little bits and bobs of English eccentricity that turn up now and then, that there's something wrong with the show, and they would rather watch something put out by mainstream cultural media involving a load of people in battle dress rushing around forests saying, "There's a Sasquatch in them damn woods!" Well, we don't actually do that. There were no smoke bombs. Okay, admittedly, we have had smoke bombs in the past and probably do it again. But this is a show for people who want to do cryptozoology properly and aren't going to be po-faced and stupid about hippies wearing silly hats. And as I said, it's not a silly hat. I think it's rather a fetching titler. But what's in the show? Well, it is a mixture of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. What's surreality, you might ask? These days it's more and more difficult to tell.
So as far as I can tell, about at least in 2021, he was arrested.
This
And I found
better and better.
and I found his sentencing, and he was in prison for a period of time, and I know he got out, but I don't know where he is now. And the email and phone number I was able to track down for him do not work anymore, or he was not answering, which is unfortunate because I want to know what happened to the door. I contacted the Oklahoma City Zoo and I said, I know this is really weird. Do y'all happen to have this door? And they have not responded. I was even willing to be like, listen, if you want to get rid of it, I'll drive down, pick the door up, and bring it home. I'll figure something out. Donate it to the Cryptozoology Museum or something, you know? But yeah, I was unable to get anything out from them. And then I spent time contacting some TV stations from the area that were around at the time to see if they had any recordings of the broadcast that talked about the zoo exhibit. And I have not gotten any response from any of them either, unfortunately. Uh, and I can't. They have situations or programs where you can request stuff, but I'm like, I don't know when to request it because they want a specific date. I don't have a specific date. I have a range between December of 1970 and, like, I don't know, June or July of 1971 is the range that I would assume that they would have broadcast something like that. So I really truly I have no idea. I'm still waiting. It's only been a few months. They might reach back out. But yeah, it's been wild. And this is a story that you see very frequently in a lot of cryptid books that are just telling the stories. They're not trying to figure it out. They're not trying to um, do the cryptid work. They're just telling these interesting, spooky stories. And it is one of the most common, like weird Bigfoot stories you'll actually run across in a lot of these. I kind of call them pop cryptid books. And I'm like, if I could figure this out, that'd be really great. I could start, being, more forward about what caused it, because a lot of people that, at least in the US, are very familiar with the story. They just assume it was, yep, the chickens were gone. It's weird, you know. But it turned into this, like, weird story of fraud and princes from faraway lands and white tiger cubs.
What happened to the farmer?
Oh, the farmer. I don't know. He remained unnamed. I was never actually able to find his name. I got him confused with a different story that is much, much more famous. The Burdine uh chicken attack with Bigfoot in Roachdale, Indiana in 72. That one was really roughly a single encounter. Bernadine family was just kind of very similar, hanging out in their house. They heard their chickens going nuts. They went out to go look, and they found that 60 of their chickens were ripped apart and left. 60 or so, yeah. They called the town marshal. He came down, he investigated everything, and while he was doing so, they discovered that the fence was ripped apart and mashed into the ground, kind of like stepped on by something very heavy. As they were looking at the fence, they turned and they heard something walking through the brush with very heavy footfalls. but they never saw it. Everything calmed down. They went back to their house. The cop left. A couple hours later, they saw a large creature standing in the doorway of the chicken coop the same night. They said that it was so large that it blocked the light coming from the interior of the chicken coop, which was about a 6'8" doorway. Yeah, they said that it had, very similar to a gorilla with long brownish hair down its body. It took off toward the barn from the coop. They chased it. They had their shotguns in their hand. They fired at it, and they were convinced they hit it. And it just kept running. It ended up disappearing, and they went back to the coop and found that an additional 50 chickens were ripped apart, and what they said were exsanguinated. This story was also fairly well known. It was written about in Lauren Coleman's earliest cryptid work, like whole book, Creatures from the Edge or something like that. I'm sorry.
Outer Edge.
Yeah, he wrote about it, and there were partially because it was in the 70s, and the 70s was like the height of the weird Bigfoot story. You've got Stan Gordon with all his UFO Bigfoot stories, and you've got Momo and the Three Toes. That's when they started becoming prominent, and other UFO sightings with the Bigfoot at the time. I'm skeptical. I wonder if it was just all the drugs everybody was doing at the time, but who knows? But
Well,
yeah,
they say
that's
if you remember the 70s, you weren't actually there.
no. But yeah, that was the other big, Bigfoot predation story. When I originally started working on this stuff, I thought it was going to be a lot more prominent in these cases that people are seeing Bigfoot doing stuff. But I actually found that they're really extraordinarily rare. The most you'll see is a Bigfoot getting, attacked by a dog. When the person sees it, if they're hunting, they have a hunting dog or that sort of thing, and the Bigfoot in defense will, grab the animal and take it down. But not in like a predation situation. That's very rare. Or at the very least, it is rare that people see them and have that happen, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And backpedaling a bit,
Yeah.
you were saying that Bladenburg was in the middle of the biggest spot for sightings of mystery black cats.
Yeah, that I've been able to find. Like I said, my numbers might be a little skewed, but they date back years. I wrote about it in my Bladenboro article as well.
Mm.
1880 was when my earliest reports really started. The biggest the longest piece I could find that wasn't just, a single sentence. Black cat spotted on X road by this person, and that's it in the newspaper, was December of 1895. Ready Fork Bridge has a bunch of woods around it. I'm not certain what part of the state that is in, but a hunter saw it while he was hunting, saw an animal running across the bridge. Excuse me. While he was hunting with his three hounds, he said that it was a large black creature that actually resembled a dog, except for the way it walked. And then later he said that as he was progressing his hunt through the day, his hounds had run off, and then he found them later attacked and badly injured. They survived, but they were badly injured at the time. 2 weeks later, north of Beaver Swamp, which is in kind of the southern part, a little middle of the state.
Mm-hmm.
A guy named Mr. Apple reported that his dog was killed by a large loping creature is the phrase that he used, covered in black hair after a fight. He said that the shoulder was gnawed off, which is, at least in my opinion, less the gnawing and more consistent with the cougars or other larger cats' attacks on the back of the neck and back of the
Yeah.
head to break the spine. Um, there was another attack at an undetermined period of time after, but soon after, where another dog was killed and ripped to pieces, presumably by the same animal. And I consider that to be the first like wave of attacks and sightings in North Carolina. It was 1895, at least the first that I have record of. There were another rash of attacks in December of 1904 in Greensboro. Again, very similar. A lot of dogs were being attacked. I suspect that that was partially because the areas that people were seeing them in these cases were much more dog heavy than they were standard livestock heavy, as well as this was when the eastern cougar was still possibly maybe around a little bit, or at least in the public knowledge, so people were a lot more careful with their livestock than I think over time ended up being, which allowed a lot more opportunity.
But the
And it
cougar wasn't black.
no, but so
Oh,
cougars
I like it when you get the bit.
so this is something really cool, and I cannot take credit for it. Brian Parsons was the one that made the link. Who's a good friend of mine. He's also a CFC member. Uh, Centered in Ohio. He made a link to the Black Panther sightings and cougars specifically because cougars have an interesting optical illusion when you see them from a certain distance in a certain kind of light. Their hair looks really dark brown or black or like a grayish black, depending on the light situation and how far you are away from them. That is a natural way of camouflage that the animals have, kind of like a dynamic camouflage, depending on the certain situations without actually changing colors.
Good God. You are a clever bugger, you are.
It wasn't me. I didn't come up with it. Brian Parsons came up with it, and I just went, "Yeah, that's right," and ran with it, and went, "Well, obviously that adds a lot of weight to a lot of these stories." They weren't just mistaking dogs or bobcats or something else.
I was in Illinois about 20 years ago, and I uncovered a whole string of what they call Black Panther stories. And this reflective hair, totally and utterly, as far as I'm concerned, it solves it, doesn't it?
I think so. When you add everything together, it really does. When you look at the numbers of reports that happen, it doesn't. The biggest question is it doesn't line up with the numbers of official estimates for the number of Western cougars in the eastern side of the United States. But I believe that they're largely just incorrect. The data is incorrect. Either the sightings are being taken seriously, or not to sound conspiratorial, but if cougars are recognized to be in an area that aren't just wanderers, if they're recognized to have a breeding population or some sort of consistent establishment, that means that the government has to pay farmers for their livestock losses as a way of protecting the animals so they can't hunt it. If it's just a wanderer, you can kill it all you want. That's not a problem because it's just a singleton one and they're not native to that area anymore. So I believe there's probably some sort of dragging of the feet when it comes to recognizing breeding populations. The Fish and Wildlife Services of some states are starting to recognize breeding populations in the eastern side. Where I know that breeding populations are recognized and known in Kentucky and recognized and known in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I know that it was recently recognized in Pennsylvania for there to be a regular path that cougars take So there's a regular, not permanent population, but moving population, a nomad population that goes through there. So it's slowly changing. It's slowly moving towards that. The other thing is, I think that they worry about, okay, if we say they're there, they're going to be hunted regardless of what we can do, and there's not a lot that they can do to stop it, you know? So I don't know. It's a very complicated situation, but I genuinely, from all the work and research I have done, I'm genuinely convinced that there is a small population of Western cougars in the eastern United States, and it has been the case basically for the last 150 years.
And these days, it's now considered that the eastern cougar and the western cougar are the same species, the same subspecies. They're not even seen as subspecifically distinct. So
I think the most that they get is a difference of clades, because the sizes were different, but only mildly. The eastern cougar was, I think, something like 12% smaller on average than the western cougar, and then they were sometimes a darker orange, yellow, tan thing. But I think that's the most difference that you actually ever see between the two.
that is absolutely brilliant. Do you realize we've been talking for nearly 40 minutes? We've only got 3.5 minutes left. We're going to have to do this again, Colin.
For sure.
I've missed talking to you. I've also missed the way that you come up with these stories that I've never heard of, or like the one that was in Lauren's book. I mean, I've heard of, but forgotten. And that you can then come up with them and come up with all sorts of new information which brings the story alive.
That's what makes it interesting. As much as I'm interested in, the big, massive, important cases like the Patterson Gimlin film, everybody talks about it, and at a certain point, you just want to hear something new.
Yeah, I agree. And there are so many people who think that if it isn't a lake monster and if it isn't Bigfoot, it's not worth paying attention to. And to me, there's all sorts of interesting things that are coming down to being really quite small, that are
Oh
just
yeah.
interesting.
And I think too, so many people think that if it's an established animal already, like the cougars being the explanation for these things, then it's like a loss for cryptozoology. And my whole thing is, no, that is still a discovery of some sort, that still adds to the amount of information we have about these animals.
It's like at Loch Ness when that guy from New Zealand said that the eDNA in the water showed that the only thing that it was likely to be would be a giant eel. And then all the British newspapers said, oh, it's only a giant eel. The monster doesn't exist. For goodness sake, man.
It's a giant eel.
That's far out. That's totally
Yeah,
far out.
absolutely.
Oh, dear. Oh, I've missed you, Colin, my dear boy.
I've missed you, John.
So, what are you working on now?
Really
You've got
just
1 minute and 22 seconds. Tell me.
not a lot. I recently moved to Baltimore. I have been just trying to, establish myself here, get a job, just live. And unfortunately, we are in a one-bedroom apartment, and there is barely enough room for me, my partner, and our cats. So I couldn't take my several hundred cryptid books and magazines and other stuff with me. So they're still at my dad's house, but when we are able to get a bigger place, I plan on moving that stuff over.
And we now have 28 seconds left. So, Colin, thank you for that. I very much enjoyed it. And we'll do it
Absolutely.
again in a couple of months' time and do some more.
Okay.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye. God bless.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe Follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, says, don't forget to ring the notification bell, otherwise you'll miss the new episodes.
And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
If you've been affected by any of the topics in today's episode, you can just bugger off, because we don't give a monkeys. Bloody well get a grip. Sort your own bloody problems out rather than ringing up somewhere.
That was a public information film.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, I see my hat is all skew-whiff. Mustn't have a skew-whiff hat. It's the sort of thing that the cryptozoological and Fortean press will object to. They'll say, that fellow Dan's had a skew-whiff hat on. Anyway, it's not very skew-whiff now. Thank you for watching. That's the end of another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to be back next week. What am I talking about next week? I have absolutely no idea. I've got some ideas, but I haven't got that far yet, so we'll just have to wait and see. I want to say a big thank you to all the people who helped with this episode, particularly my guest, Colin. Lovely to have you back, Colin. We'll have you on again very soon. My producer, Louis, who is now gainfully employed, and I'm not allowed to make funny jokes about it, so I will just say that he's gainfully employed, and I won't make funny jokes about what he's doing. And I want to say a big thank you to Graham, to Gwyn, to V, to Richard, and to everybody else who helps me keep this circus on the road. I will be back on Saturday, and as I said, I have no idea what I'm talking about. But assuming that I'm there doing all the gubbins I normally do on a Saturday afternoon, the notifications and the live chat and everything else before I usually go to sleep for the rest of the afternoon, and you're there watching, and I'm talking to you, Mr. McCrinnan, then I most certainly am going to be seeing you.